Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at the back of the briefing room, her human frame dwarfed by the towering alien officers surrounding her. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face as she listened to Admiral Vexitar, the Krillian commander, outline their next mission against the hostile Zephyrian forces. "The enemy has fortified the mining colony on Kepler 442b, Admiral Vexitar announced, his forearms gesturing toward the holographic display. "Intelligence suggests they have over 10,000 troops and advanced plasma cannons protecting their position." Sarah studied the tactical display, her mind racing as she analyzed the terrain and enemy positions. She could see at least 3 major weaknesses in the Zephyrian defense, but she knew better than to speak up. In the 6 months since Earth had joined the Galactic Defense Coalition, human officers were still viewed as curious additions rather than serious military assets. The other species in the coalition had been fighting wars for thousands of years. The Krillians with their superior technology, the massive Gorvani with their incredible strength, and the telepathic Venlari with their ability to coordinate perfectly in battle. Humans were seen as primitive newcomers who barely understood space combat. "We will deploy our standard assault formation," continued Admiral Vexitar. "The Gorvani heavy infantry will lead the charge while our Krillian tech specialists disable their shields. The Venlari will coordinate air support." Sarah raised her hand tentatively. "Sir, I've noticed some patterns in their defensive positioning that might—" "Lieutenant Chen," the Admiral interrupted, his yellow eyes barely glancing in her direction. "Your enthusiasm is noted, but this is a conversation for experienced officers. Please observe and learn." A few of the other officers chuckled, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had graduated top of her class from Earth's newly established Galactic Military Academy, had studied every major battle in Coalition history, and had spent countless hours analyzing alien military tactics. But none of that mattered here. Captain Thorak, a massive Gorvani warrior with stone-like skin, turned slightly toward her. "Humans are brave, I give you that," he said, his voice rumbling like an earthquake. "But war requires more than courage. It requires experience you simply do not have." "The captain speaks truth," added Commander Xylix, a tall Venlari with silver skin and large black eyes. "Your species has only just discovered faster-than-light travel. We have been perfecting the art of warfare since before your planet had complex life." Sarah bit back her response. She had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times. Humans were always the enthusiastic students, never the teachers. They were given small roles in logistics or communications, kept away from any real strategic decisions. The Coalition appreciated Earth's industrial capacity and population, but they didn't respect human military thinking. The briefing continued for another hour, with the alien officers discussing complex battle plans that Sarah could see were flawed. They relied too heavily on direct confrontation and overwhelming force. They had never needed to be creative because their technology and natural abilities had always been enough. But the Zephyrians were different. Sarah had been studying their tactics for weeks, ever since intelligence reports started coming in about their new defensive strategies. They were adapting, learning from each coalition attack, and becoming more dangerous. The standard approaches weren't working anymore. After the briefing, Sarah walked through the corridors of the GCS Harmony, the massive coalition starship that served as their mobile command center. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering, combining the best technology from all member species. Humans had contributed the coffee machines and entertainment systems. She passed groups of alien officers engaged in animated discussions about the upcoming battle. None of them acknowledged her presence. To them, she was just another human trying to play soldier in a game far above her level. Sarah's quarters were small but comfortable, designed to accommodate the various physiological needs of different species. She sat at her desk and pulled up her personal tactical computer, a human-designed device that the aliens found quaint. but harmless. For the next several hours, she analyzed every piece of data available about the Kepler 442b colony. She studied satellite images, intercepted communications, and previous battle reports. Slowly, a picture began to form in her mind. The Zephyrians weren't just defending the colony randomly, they were baiting the coalition into a specific type of attack. Their defensive positions looked strong from the front, but had deliberately weak points that would attract a standard coalition assault. Behind those weak points were carefully concealed kill zones designed to massacre anyone who took the bait. Sarah's hands flew over her computer as she modeled different attack scenarios. Every conventional approach she tried resulted in massive coalition casualties. But there was another way, a human way. Humans had never had the luxury of overwhelming technological superiority. They had learned to fight smarter, to use deception and misdirection, to turn enemy strengths against them. Earth's military history was filled with smaller forces defeating larger ones through cunning rather than raw power. She began drafting an alternative battle plan, one that used the Zephyrian trap against them. Instead of avoiding the kill zones, she would deliberately trigger them while the main force attacked from an unexpected direction. It would require precise timing and coordination, and it would mean sacrificing some forces as decoys. The alien officers would never approve such a plan. They would see it as needlessly complex and risky. They preferred straightforward tactics where superior firepower decided the outcome. Sarah spent the entire night refining her strategy, running simulation after simulation. By dawn, she had a plan that could work, but she had no way to implement it. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Zephyrian fleet approaching their position. The mining colony wasn't just being defended, it was being turned into a major military base. The stakes had suddenly become much higher. Admiral Vextar called an emergency briefing. The tension in the room was obvious as the alien officers realized their standard assault plan would now face not just ground defenses but also space-based support. "We must accelerate our timeline," the Admiral announced. "Intelligence suggests the enemy fleet will arrive in 72 hours. We need to take the colony before then or risk being trapped between ground and space forces." Captain Thorak slammed his massive fist on the table. "Then we hit them harder and faster, deploy everything we have in a full assault." "That's exactly what they want us to do," Sarah said quietly. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, most showing surprise that she had spoken without permission. Admiral Vextar's expression was cold. "Lieutenant, I believe I made it clear that—" "Sir, please," Sarah interrupted, knowing she was risking her career. "I've been analyzing their positions all night. This is a trap. They're trying to lure us into a kill zone while their fleet arrives to finish us off." Commander Xylix leaned forward. "You presume to understand Zephyrian tactics better than officers who have fought them for decades?" "I understand human tactics," Sarah replied, standing straighter. "And what I'm seeing here is something my species has used many times throughout history. Create an apparent weakness to draw in an enemy, then crush them when they take the bait." Captain Thorak laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Humans always think their primitive warfare applies to real military science. This is space combat, not your ancient tribal conflicts." Sarah felt something snap inside her. Months of condescension and dismissal boiled over into controlled anger. "Those primitive tactics allowed my species to survive and thrive in environments where stronger, more advanced civilizations would have failed. We learned to win not because we were bigger or had better technology, but because we could think differently." The room erupted in angry voices. Several officers began speaking at once, some defending the traditional approach, others expressing outrage at Sarah's presumption. Admiral Vextar raised one of his 4 arms for silence. "Enough," he commanded. "Lieutenant Chen, you are out of line. Report to your quarters and consider yourself confined until further notice." Sarah's heart sank, but she made one last desperate attempt. "Sir, if I'm wrong, you lose nothing. But if I'm right, and you proceed with the standard assault, you could lose thousands of coalition soldiers." "Your concern is noted," the Admiral replied coldly. "But this mission is too important to risk on unproven theories from an inexperienced human officer." As Sarah walked toward the door, her mind raced. She couldn't let the coalition walk into a massacre. There had to be something she could do, some way to prove her worth. Then, an idea formed. It was dangerous, and would probably end her military career, but it might save lives. That night, Sarah slipped out of her quarters using maintenance corridors she had memorized during her months on the ship. The Harmony's security systems were designed to prevent alien intrusions, not to stop human crew members from moving around their own ship. She made her way to the communications array and used her security codes to send an encrypted message to her former classmates on Earth. Within hours, she had assembled a small team of human volunteers willing to carry out an unauthorized reconnaissance mission. The plan was simple but audacious. A small human strike team would infiltrate the mining colony ahead of the main assault, gather intelligence on the real defensive positions, and, if possible, sabotage key installations to create openings for the coalition forces. What Sarah didn't anticipate was how quickly word of her unauthorized mission would spread through the human crew members aboard coalition ships. Within 24 hours, she had over 200 volunteers from various human vessels, all willing to risk court-martial to support their fellow officer. The human crews had been feeling the same frustration Sarah experienced. They were tired of being treated as junior partners in an alliance they had joined as equals. This became their chance to prove themselves. As the coalition fleet prepared for its assault on the mining colony, Sarah and her impromptu human force prepared for their own mission. They would use small, fast ships designed for mining and exploration, vessels the aliens considered too primitive for military use. Sarah stood in the cramped briefing room of the human transport ship Determination, looking at the faces of men and women who had volunteered to follow her into almost certain disaster. They came from dozens of different Earth nations and colonies, but they all shared the same determined expression. "I want to be clear about what we're doing," Sarah told them. "This mission is not authorized by Coalition Command. If we're caught, we'll face court-martial. If we're killed, it will be treated as a training accident. But if we succeed, we might save thousands of coalition lives and prove that humanity deserves a real voice in this war." Sergeant Martinez, a former Earth Marine, raised his hand. "Ma'am, what happens if we find out you're wrong about the trap?" Sarah met his eyes steadily. "Then we extract immediately and face the consequences. But I'm not wrong. I've studied this battle pattern in human conflicts from ancient Greece to the corporate wars on Mars. It's a classic deception, and it's going to work unless someone stops it." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Private Kim, barely 18 years old, stood up. "I joined the coalition to defend Earth and humanity. If this is how we do it, then let's go." One by one, the others stood as well. Sarah felt a surge of pride and terror. These people were trusting her with their lives based on nothing more than her conviction and their shared frustration with being underestimated. As the human strike force prepared to launch, Sarah took one last look at the tactical display showing the coalition fleet moving toward Kepler 442b. In 36 hours, Admiral Vextar would begin his assault. Sarah's team had that long to prove that humans belonged on the battlefield as equals, not as observers. The small human ships launched silently from the Determination's hangar bay, using stealth technology adapted from Earth's submarine warfare. They were invisible to the massive alien sensor arrays designed to detect large warships and energy signatures. As they approached the mining colony, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Everything she had worked for, everything she believed about human potential in warfare would be tested in the next day and a half. Looking out at the distant lights of the Zephyrian colony, she whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. Humanity's reputation in the Galactic Defense Coalition was about to be forged in fire and blood on an alien world far from home. The surface of Kepler 442b was a maze of rocky canyons and industrial structures. Sarah's team moved through the darkness like shadows, their modified human armor absorbing rather than reflecting the alien moon's pale light. The mining colony spread before them in the valley below, its defensive positions exactly matching her predictions. "Overwatch, this is Ground Team Alpha," whispered Corporal Davies, the team's communications specialist. "We have eyes on the primary defensive line, confirming Lieutenant Chen's assessment." Sarah crouched beside a boulder that provided cover from the automated sensors sweeping the area. Through her scope, she could see the carefully arranged weaknesses in the Zephyrian defensive line. To alien military thinking, they would appear as logical assault points. But Sarah could see the concealed plasma cannon batteries positioned to create overlapping fields of fire across those very areas. "How many kill zones do you count, Davies?" she asked quietly. "At least 6 major ones and probably a dozen smaller ambush points. Ma'am, if the Coalition hits those positions with standard tactics, it'll be a massacre," Sarah finished. "That's why we're here." The human strike team had split into 4 groups to gather intelligence from different angles. What they found confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The Zephyrians hadn't just prepared a single trap. They had created a multi-layered death maze designed to funnel Coalition forces into predetermined kill zones while their fleet arrived to crush any survivors. Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled through their communications. "Team Beta reporting. We found something interesting. There's a network of underground tunnels connecting their main installations. Looks like they're planning to move troops around without being detected." Sarah's mind immediately began processing this new information. The tunnels weren't on any of the intelligence reports, which meant Coalition orbital scans had missed them. But they also represented an opportunity. "Can we access those tunnels without triggering their security systems?" she asked. "Negative on avoiding detection completely," Martinez replied. "But we might be able to make it look like equipment malfunctions or maintenance issues. These human hacking tools work differently than what they're expecting." Private Torres from Team Gamma chimed in. "Lieutenant, we've also discovered their communication hub. It's lightly defended because they think it's hidden. If we could take it out during the battle..." Sarah felt pieces of a larger plan beginning to form. The Coalition was expecting to fight a defensive battle against entrenched positions, but what if they could turn it into something else entirely? "All teams, continue surveillance but maintain distance. We need complete intelligence before we make any moves," she ordered. For the next 12 hours, the human teams mapped every aspect of the Zephyrian defenses. They discovered hidden supply depots, backup command centers, and most importantly, the real defensive positions concealed behind the obvious ones. But as dawn approached on the alien world, Sarah faced a crucial decision. She had the intelligence that could save the Coalition fleet, but no way to communicate it without revealing their unauthorized mission. And even if she could get the information to Admiral Vex's Tar, would he believe it or simply see it as another example of human presumption? "Ma'am," Davies called softly. "We're receiving coded transmissions from the Coalition fleet. Admiral Vextar is moving up the assault timeline. They're beginning their approach in 6 hours instead of 12. Sarah's blood ran cold. The earlier timeline gave her team much less opportunity to influence the battle. They would need to take direct action rather than just provide intelligence. She activated her command frequency, speaking to all 4 teams simultaneously. "Change of plans, everyone. We're not just observing anymore. Torres, how quickly can your team take out that communication hub?" "Give me 30 minutes once we start moving, ma'am." Martinez, those tunnels you found, can we use them to get inside their main defensive perimeter? It'll be tight, but yes, we'll be exposed for about 200 meters, but after that we'll be inside their inner ring. Sarah looked up at the alien sky, where she could just barely make out the approaching dots of light that marked the coalition fleet. In a few hours, thousands of soldiers would die unless she could find a way to level the playing field. "Here's what we're going to do," she announced. "We're going to give the coalition a fighting chance by removing some of the Zephyrian advantages. Torres, take out their communications. Martinez, use those tunnels to get teams Alpha and Beta inside their perimeter. Davies, I need you to tap into their sensor network and feed false information." "Ma'am, that sounds like we're starting a war all by ourselves," Corporal Yang observed. Sarah smiled grimly. "No, Yang. We're ending one before it really begins." The human teams moved with precision that would have surprised their alien commanders. While coalition doctrine emphasized overwhelming force and technological superiority, human military training focused on adaptability and creative problem-solving. Each team member could perform multiple roles and adapt their tactics in real time. Torres's team approached the communication hub using techniques adapted from Earth urban warfare. They moved through the industrial maze surrounding the mining colony, using the Zephyrians' own equipment as cover. When they finally reached the facility, they discovered it was guarded by only 4 sentries. "These defenses are designed to stop a frontal assault by heavy troops," Torres whispered into his communicator. "They never expected anyone to sneak up on them." Meanwhile, Martinez led Teams Alpha and Beta through the tunnel system. The passages were cramped and clearly designed for Zephyrian physiology, but humans were smaller and more flexible. They moved through maintenance shafts and service tunnels that larger alien troops couldn't have navigated. Sarah accompanied Martinez's group, her heart pounding as they crawled through spaces barely large enough for human bodies. The irony wasn't lost on her. Their supposed physical inferiority was becoming an advantage. "Lieutenant," Davies whispered through the communications link, "I'm inside their sensor network. You were right about everything. They have preset targeting solutions for every obvious approach route, but I can feed them false sensor data to make our fleet appear to be coming from different angles." "Do it," Sarah ordered. "Make them think the main assault is coming from the north, while the real attack happens from the south." As the human teams executed their operations, Sarah began to feel something she had never experienced in months of serving with the coalition: respect from her fellow soldiers. These humans were following her orders not because regulations required it, but because they believed in her tactical judgment. The communication hub went down in a precisely timed assault that left the Zephyrian defenders confused about what had happened. Torres's team made the destruction look like an equipment failure, buying precious minutes before the enemy could respond. At the same time, Davies successfully infiltrated the sensor network and began feeding false information to Zephyrian command. The enemy would see coalition ships approaching from the north in a standard formation, while the real fleet repositioned for Sarah's planned southern assault. Martinez's teams reached the interior of the main defensive perimeter and found themselves in the heart of the Zephyrian installation. Here, Sarah could see the real scale of the trap: hidden plasma batteries, concealed troop positions, and automated systems that would have devastated any conventional attack. "Demolitions team, start placing charges on the power grid," Sarah ordered. "When that coalition assault begins, I want every automated system in this facility to go dark." But as her teams prepared their sabotage operations, Sarah realized they had been discovered. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility as Zephyrian troops scrambled to respond to the security breach. "Contact!" Martinez shouted as enemy soldiers emerged from concealed positions throughout the installation. The battle that followed was unlike anything in coalition doctrine. Human soldiers, outnumbered 10-1, used speed and tactical flexibility to outmaneuver their alien opponents. They turned the Zephyrians' own defensive positions against them, using cover and concealment in ways their enemies hadn't anticipated. Sarah found herself in the middle of a firefight that would have overwhelmed a traditional coalition unit. But her human soldiers adapted instantly to changing conditions, providing covering fire while others completed sabotage missions, then switching roles as the situation demanded. "Lieutenant!" Davies called out from his position at a computer terminal. "The Coalition fleet is beginning their assault run. Admiral Vexitar is doing exactly what you predicted, straight into the kill zone." Through the facility's observation windows, Sarah could see the Coalition ships approaching in perfect formation, completely unaware of the trap awaiting them. In minutes, they would be within range of the concealed weapons that would tear them apart. "How much longer do you need to complete the sabotage?" she shouted to Martinez over the sound of weapons fire. 2 more minutes for the power grid, 3 for the automated defenses." Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Davies, open a communication channel to Admiral Vexitar. Override all security protocols." "Ma'am, that will reveal our position to everyone." "Do it." Seconds later, Sarah's voice was broadcasting on all Coalition frequencies. "Admiral Vexitar, this is Lieutenant Chen. You are approaching a massive trap. Abort your current approach vector immediately." The response came back filled with static and anger. "Lieutenant Chen, you are in violation of direct orders. Explain your position immediately." "Sir, I'm inside the Zephyrian defensive perimeter. You are flying into overlapping fields of fire from concealed plasma batteries. Change your approach to Vector 77 Mark IV and delay your assault by 10 minutes. There was a long pause filled with weapons fire from the battle around her. Finally, Admiral Vexitar's voice returned. "Lieutenant, if you are lying or mistaken, I will have you court-martialed and imprisoned for the rest of your natural life." "I understand, sir, but if I'm right, and you don't change course, you'll lose half the fleet in the next 5 minutes." Sarah could almost hear the Admiral's internal struggle through the communicator. Everything in his military experience told him to continue with the planned assault. But something in Sarah's voice, or perhaps the obvious sound of battle in the background, made him hesitate. "Fleet command to all units," Admiral Vexitar finally announced. "Change to attack Vector 77 Mark IV. Delay assault by 10 minutes. As the Coalition ships began changing course, Martinez's demolition charges detonated throughout the Zephyrian facility. Power grids collapsed, automated weapons went offline, and confusion spread through the enemy ranks. The Zephyrian trap, so carefully prepared, began falling apart as human sabotage eliminated key systems. When the Coalition fleet finally began its assault from an unexpected direction, they found disorganized defenders struggling with equipment failures and communication breakdowns. "This is Admiral Vexitar to all Coalition forces," came the announcement over their communicators. "Begin full assault. Enemy defenses appear to be compromised." Sarah and her teams fought their way out of the facility as Coalition forces landed throughout the colony. The battle that should have been a massacre for the Alliance became a rout of the Zephyrian defenders. But even as victory became apparent, Sarah knew her real challenge was just beginning. She had disobeyed direct orders, conducted unauthorized military operations, and risked the lives of over 200 human soldiers based on her own tactical judgment. As Coalition forces secured the mining colony, Admiral Vexitar's transport ship landed near the captured facility. Sarah watched through a broken window as the Admiral and his staff emerged, their expressions unreadable. "Lieutenant Chen," came the call over her communicator. "Report to the Admiral immediately for debriefing." Sarah looked around at her exhausted soldiers. They had proven themselves in battle, shown that human military thinking had value, and saved countless Coalition lives. But would any of that matter to a court-martial tribunal? "Whatever happens next," she told her team, "you've shown today that humans belong on the battlefield as equals. Remember that." As Sarah walked toward the Admiral's position, She carried herself with the confidence of a soldier who had achieved something important. She had transformed from an ignored junior officer into someone who had influenced a major battle through her own initiative and tactical thinking. Admiral Vex Tar stood waiting for her, surrounded by alien officers whose expressions ranged from confusion to anger to something that might have been respect. The tall Krillian commander studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Lieutenant Chen," he said formally, "your actions today were completely outside the chain of command and in violation of direct orders." Sarah stood at attention, preparing for the consequences of her choices. "Yes, sir. I take full responsibility for my decisions and those of the volunteers who followed my orders. Your tactical assessment was—" The Admiral paused, as if the words were difficult for him. "Completely accurate. The Zephyrian defensive strategy would have resulted in catastrophic casualties for our forces." One of the alien officers, Captain Thorak, stepped forward. "The human soldiers under your command fought with exceptional skill and courage. They adapted to changing conditions in ways that impressed our battlefield observers." Sarah felt a surge of pride for her team, but she kept her expression neutral. "My soldiers performed their duties with distinction, sir." Admiral Vex Tar nodded slowly. "Indeed they did, which presents me with a significant problem, Lieutenant. How do I discipline an officer whose insubordination saved thousands of Coalition lives?" The question hung in the air for several moments. Sarah realized that this moment would define not just her own future, but the role of humans in the Coalition military for years to come. "Sir," she replied carefully, "I would suggest that the results speak for themselves. Human military doctrine brings capabilities that complement our alien allies' strengths. Today proved that diversity in tactical thinking makes the Coalition stronger." Admiral Vex Tar exchanged glances with his staff officers. Something had shifted in their attitudes toward the young human who stood before them. The condescension was gone, replaced by serious consideration of her words. "Lieutenant Chen," the Admiral finally said, "you will return to the fleet for a full debriefing on your tactical methods. Your unauthorized mission will be reviewed by Coalition Command. However, given the successful outcome, I believe your court-martial will be postponed indefinitely." Sarah felt relief flood through her, but the Admiral wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, "I am recommending you for promotion to captain and assignment to the Coalition Strategic Planning Division. It appears we have been underutilizing human tactical capabilities." As the implications of his words sank in, Sarah realized that everything had changed. She was no longer the ignored human officer standing at the back of briefing rooms. She had earned her place at the strategic planning table through actions rather than species or seniority. But even as she savored this victory, Sarah knew it was only the beginning. The approaching Zephyrian fleet would require new strategies and new thinking to defeat. The real test of her abilities and humanity's place in the Coalition was yet to come. Looking up at the alien sky where enemy ships would soon arrive, Sarah felt ready for whatever challenges awaited. She had proven that being underestimated could be turned into an advantage. Now she would show the galaxy what humans could accomplish when given the chance to lead. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the GCS Harmony, now wearing the insignia of her new rank and position within the Coalition Strategic Planning Division. The view screen displayed the approaching Zephyrian fleet, over 300 warships arranged in battle formation, heading directly for the mining colony they had just liberated. "Fleet composition analysis complete," reported Commander Xylix, the Venlari officer who had once dismissed Sarah's tactical insights. "Enemy force includes 12 dreadnoughts, 48 heavy cruisers, and over 200 escort vessels. They outnumber our forces 3-1. Admiral Vex Tar turned to Sarah, a gesture that still surprised the other alien officers. Just weeks ago, she had been an ignored lieutenant. Now she was the primary strategic advisor for the entire coalition fleet. "Captain Chen, what are your tactical recommendations?" Sarah studied the enemy formation with the confidence of someone who had proven her worth in battle. The Zephyrian fleet was impressive, but she could already see the weaknesses in their approach. "They're using standard overwhelming force doctrine," she observed. "Same tactical thinking that got them surprised at the colony. They assume superior numbers guarantee victory." "And they do not?" asked Captain Thorak, the massive Gorvani warrior who now spoke to Sarah as an equal rather than a curiosity. Sarah smiled, the expression carrying confidence that made the alien officers lean forward with interest. "Admiral, I recommend we give them exactly what they expect, a desperate defensive battle by an outnumbered coalition force." "That sounds like surrender," muttered Colonel Hrex, a Krillian officer who still questioned human tactical methods. "No, Colonel, it sounds like bait," Sarah replied. "The Zephyrians have one critical weakness that their superior numbers actually make worse. They're used to winning through force, which means they've never learned to adapt when their initial strategy fails." Admiral Vextar's four arms moved in the Krillian gesture for deep thought. "Explain your strategy, Captain." Sarah activated the holographic display, her hands moving confidently as she outlined her plan. "We divide our fleet into 3 groups. The first group, our heaviest ships, takes a defensive position around the mining colony. They engage the enemy directly, exactly as expected." "That group will be destroyed," Captain Thorak observed. "Not if they're supported by the second group," Sarah continued. "Fast attack vessels hidden in the asteroid field beyond the colony. They wait until the Zephyrian fleet commits to the assault, then attack their rear formations." Commander Xylek studied the tactical display with his species' natural analytical abilities. "A pincer movement, classic but effective. However, the enemy will still have numerical superiority even divided between 2 fronts." Sarah's smile widened. "Which is where the third group comes in. While the Zephyrians are focused on the battle around the colony, our fastest ships will jump to their home system and attack their supply base. Without resupply, that massive fleet becomes a liability rather than an asset." The bridge fell silent as the alien officers processed the audacity of her plan. Admiral Vextar was the first to speak. "You propose to attack their home system during a defensive battle? That requires precise timing and coordination across multiple star systems." "Yes, sir. It also requires the enemy to react predictably to changing conditions. Humans have been studying Zephyrian military psychology since we joined the coalition. They respond to surprise with increased aggression rather than tactical flexibility." Colonel Hrex shook his head. "Captain, this plan depends on too many variables. If any element fails, then we fall back to standard tactics and accept higher casualties," Sarah interrupted. "But if it succeeds, we end this war in one decisive engagement instead of fighting it for years across dozens of systems." The alien officers exchanged glances. This was military thinking, unlike anything in their experience. Coalition doctrine emphasized careful planning and overwhelming superiority. Sarah was proposing calculated risks and psychological warfare. Admiral Vextar made his decision. "Captain Chen, you have command authority for this operation. All fleet elements will follow your tactical directives." The words sent a shockwave through the bridge. A human officer, less than a year out of basic training, had been given command of the largest coalition fleet ever assembled. Some of the alien officers looked skeptical, but none questioned the admiral's judgment. Over the next 6 hours, Sarah worked with fleet commanders to implement her strategy. The process revealed the depth of her tactical knowledge and her ability to adapt quickly to new information. "Group 1 will be commanded by Captain Thorak," she announced during the fleet briefing. "Your job is to make the Zephyrians believe they're winning, while gradually falling back toward the colony. Draw them in, but don't let them realize it's intentional. The massive Gorvani warrior nodded approvingly. A fighting retreat. My people understand such tactics. Group 2, under Commander Xylix, will use Venlari telepathic coordination to achieve perfect timing on the rear assault. Wait until the enemy fleet is fully committed before revealing your position. The silver-skinned Venlari officer's large eyes showed respect. Your understanding of our species' capabilities is impressive, Captain. Group 3 will be led by myself aboard the fastest human vessels, Sarah continued. We'll use human stealth technology and jump drive modifications to reach the enemy supply base before they can respond to our assault. Colonel Rex raised an objection. Captain, human ships lack the firepower to destroy a fortified supply base. Sarah's expression was confident. We don't need to destroy it, Colonel. We just need to convince the Zephyrian fleet that we can. Sometimes the threat of losing something is more powerful than actually losing it. As the coalition fleet moved into position, Sarah found herself commanding not just human soldiers, but alien officers who had initially dismissed her species as militarily insignificant. The irony wasn't lost on her. The battle began exactly as Sarah had predicted. The Zephyrian fleet approached in perfect formation, confident in their numerical superiority. Captain Thorak's defensive group engaged them in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to protect the mining colony. Enemy taking the bait, reported the tactical officer. They're committing their full force to the frontal assault. Sarah watched the tactical display as hundreds of ships exchanged fire in the void around the mining colony. The coalition forces were falling back as planned, but she could see the strain in the transmissions from Thorak's command ship. Casualties are mounting in Group 1, Admiral Vextar observed. Are you certain about the timing? Trust the plan, Admiral, Sarah replied calmly. Commander Xylix, execute Phase 2. The hidden coalition ships emerged from the asteroid field with perfect coordination, striking the rear of the Zephyrian formation just as their attention was focused on the apparent breakthrough at the colony. Chaos erupted in the enemy ranks as they found themselves fighting on two fronts. Group 3, execute Phase 3, Sarah commanded as she led the fastest ships toward the jump point that would take them to the Zephyrian supply base. The journey through hyperspace took 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. Everything depended on reaching the supply base before the Zephyrian fleet could respond to the changing battle situation. When they emerged near the enemy home system, Sarah found exactly what she had expected, a massive supply depot protected by only a light defensive force. The Zephyrians had committed everything to their offensive, leaving their rear areas vulnerable. All ships, begin assault on the supply depot, Sarah ordered. Make as much noise as possible. I want them to believe we're destroying everything they need to continue this war. The human ships, though small compared to alien dreadnoughts, had been modified with the best coalition technology. Their attack on the supply base created spectacular explosions visible across the entire star system. More importantly, Sarah's psychological assessment proved accurate. When news of the supply base attack reached the Zephyrian fleet, they reacted with exactly the kind of aggressive panic she had anticipated. Captain, reported the communications officer, we're intercepting Zephyrian fleet communications. They're abandoning the battle to return and defend their supply lines. Sarah felt the satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. Signal the fleet. All groups converge on the retreating enemy. We have them exactly where we want them. What followed was not a battle, but a rout. The Zephyrian fleet, caught between multiple coalition forces and panicked about their supply situation, lost all tactical cohesion. Ships fled in different directions, command structures collapsed, and their overwhelming numerical advantage became meaningless. Within 4 hours, the largest Zephyrian fleet ever assembled had been destroyed or scattered. The coalition had achieved total victory with minimal casualties, thanks to tactics that no alien commander would have conceived. Standing on the bridge of the Harmony as the last Zephyrian ships surrendered, Sarah realized she had achieved something remarkable. She had gone from being an ignored human officer to commanding the respect of every major species in the coalition. Admiral Vextar approached her, his forearms spread in the Krillian gesture of highest honor. "Captain Chen, your tactical brilliance has not only won this battle but potentially ended the war. The Zephyrian High Command is requesting peace negotiations." "Victory belongs to all coalition forces, Admiral," Sarah replied diplomatically. "I simply provided a different perspective on familiar problems." Captain Thorak's deep voice rumbled with amusement. "Different perspective? Captain, you have revolutionized coalition military doctrine. Every species in our alliance will be studying human tactical methods." Commander Xylix added his own praise. "Your understanding of military psychology exceeds anything in our databases. The Zephyrians never realized they were being manipulated until it was too late." As the coalition fleet began securing the defeated enemy forces, Sarah received a message that would change her life again. Admiral Vexatar read it aloud to the assembled officers. "Captain Sarah Chen is hereby promoted to Commodore and appointed as the first Director of Integrated Tactical Operations for the Galactic Defense Coalition. Her mandate is to develop new military doctrines that incorporate the unique capabilities of all member species." The alien officers on the bridge began the complex series of gestures that each species used to show respect. For the first time since joining the coalition, Sarah saw no condescension, no dismissive attitudes, and no assumptions about human military inferiority. But even as she accepted congratulations from officers who had once ignored her, Sarah's mind was already working on the next challenge. The war with the Zephyrians might be ending, but intelligence reports suggested other hostile species were watching the coalition's military capabilities with interest. "Admiral," she said quietly, "I recommend we begin immediate analysis of our tactical performance in this battle. Other enemies will study what we accomplished here and develop countermeasures." Admiral Vextar's yellow eyes showed something approaching admiration. "Already thinking about the next war, Commodore." "Not the next war, sir. The next victory. Humans have a saying, the best defense is a good offense. But I prefer, the best offense is thinking 3 moves ahead of your enemy." As the coalition fleet returned to base, Sarah Chen stood on the bridge with the confidence of someone who had proven herself beyond any doubt. She had transformed from an ignored junior officer into one of the most respected military minds in galactic history. The aliens who had once dismissed humanity as militarily insignificant now sought human tactical advice for their own operations. Coalition military academies were already incorporating human strategic thinking into their curricula, but for Sarah, the greatest victory wasn't personal recognition or promotion. It was the knowledge that humans had earned their place as equals in the galactic community through merit rather than accommodation. She looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere among them, other challenges awaited. There would be new enemies to face, new battles to fight, and new tactics to develop. But now humanity would face those challenges not as junior partners, but as leaders in galactic defense. The girl who had been ignored in briefing rooms just months ago had become the woman who commanded fleets and shaped military doctrine for an entire galactic civilization. She had proven that being underestimated was often the first step to becoming invincible. As the Harmony entered hyperspace for the journey home, Sarah began planning the next phase of coalition military development. There were other human officers showing tactical brilliance, other species with untapped military potential, and new technologies that could revolutionize space warfare. The universe was vast, filled with challenges and opportunities. But humanity was ready, led by officers who had learned that sometimes the best way to earn respect was to take it through undeniable competence and unwavering courage. From ignored to invincible, it had been a remarkable journey. But for Commodore Sarah Chen and the human officers following her example, it was just the beginning of humanity's rise to military prominence among the stars.